So very pleased to have you along. Kim Cassidy, you're academic, Edgehill University, do a lot around high streets. We've got Joe Barrett with us, who's on the government's High Street Task Force, I think I'm right in saying.
Yep.
Done a lot around teenage markets in Stockport and Foodie Friday, which I think we'll talk about. And we're joined by Matt Baker, who's been on the Grimsey Review as well as Kim. But you've also been doing some work with the Local Government Association around high streets, and you're currently working on York City Council's high street strategy. So we're going to have a conversation.
Their consultation, yeah.
Sorry?
Their consultation, yeah.
Their consultation, yeah, thanks. So we're going to have a conversation about high streets. But let's kick it off. What's the impact of the coronavirus, do you think, in terms of high streets? Kim, do you want to go first and we'll work along?
Okay, yeah. Well, I think clearly it's had an impact. My area is consumer behaviour, particularly, and how we behave in the high streets. So I think some of the things that are people are thinking a lot more about what's important to them.
Yes.
And I think when this is all over, people will value things much more like the community sense of being part of a community, which is very hard to get virtually. We can be, but it's not the same as the human interaction, which I think is very important. And for me, that was something which has been starting in town centres and high streets, and I think that will be the importance of that will be increasing.
Yeah.
So I think people are also thinking about the goods and services that they are buying, and particularly I've heard it called the instrumental, the idea that the value of whatever they're buying much more in terms of is this going to last a long time? What sort of quality is this? So I think that's going to be important. The other things that I thought, the value of the experiential, the experience, I think, again, that's linked to being part of being human, wanting something that taps into our emotions much more, because we can see we can do things offline, but it's not tapping into our emotional interest as much. So I think that those are things, and obviously the Foodie Friday, and that is very much about emotions, senses, and I think there'll be more of that, which was actually coming through before the virus. So I think it's going to sort of reinforce some of the trends or the things that we see in the high street before it happened, actually.
So it might accelerate some of the virus might accelerate some of what was developing on the high street, do you think?
Absolutely. And I know Matt's got some views on the digital, the speed of digital transformation in the high street, and I think that's going to increase at a faster rate probably than it has done today.
Yeah. Well, let's bring Matt in. What's your view, Matt? Acceleration of what was developing anyway?
Yes, I think it will. I think there are two main points where I feel we'll see significant changes. I think the first is we're going to see a rapid move now towards digital transformation. I think as millions of people are now working at home and shopping online, and earlier this week we saw shopping online exceed normal kind of spending for the first time. And I think we're going to see a lot of digital habits harden during the coronavirus sort of lockdown. So I think when we return to normal, whenever that is, I think we'll see more consumers continuing that sort of digital spending pattern. And I think that shops and towns and places that don't have a sort of significant digital maturity will be left behind. What does that mean? It means that businesses need to have sort of EPOS integrated digital systems. It needs to be sort of seamless across all their channels, and they need to be communicating to customers in real time, with offers. They need to be capturing data on basket spend, and they need to have a much better understanding of who their customers are. So they need to really employ all the sort of digital tools. The second thing will be, I think, as Kim has alluded to, we're going to see a bigger growth in the experience economy. We were already seeing that beforehand. Leisure was particularly strong in the UK. I think we're forecast to be spending something like over 120 billion the UK was on leisure by 2023. And I think as we come out of lockdown, humans are very sort of social creatures, and we're going to want more of that community experience, whether that's in kind of food halls, in pubs and restaurants, open plazas, music, all of that. I think that will grow as there's a need to connect with that community experience. So I think we'll see more of that. But I think we also need to warn that there's going to be some really difficult times ahead for high streets. Before the lockdown, consumer confidence was very low anyway. I mean, at the end of 2019, it was the lowest in 6 years. After the general election, it went up a little bit. And yesterday, we saw the consumer confidence index show it's dropped down 2 points. So I think consumer confidence is going to be very weak. And we're going to see a lot of towns really struggle, particularly the secondary locations, those places where they rely a lot on kind of low-paid service economy jobs, many of which may go. I mean, earlier today, it was reported that a fifth of small businesses are at risk of collapse. So I think it is going to be very difficult times. People see the high street, often government does, I think, as quite a sort of parochial issue. But I think they need to take, much more seriously. There was a poll by the UPP Foundation last month, which asked people what their most important local issue was. And the high street polled at 48% on the same as the NHS. It was only housing that was more important. So I think it is an absolutely critical issue, and government must think long and hard, and particularly local government as well, about how they start planning to come through this crisis.
Okay, let's come back to that. Joe, you've got lots of practical experience on this, and I know you've been doing stuff around Stepping Hill Hospital in response to the coronavirus. Tell us a bit about that, but also share your view on the virus and its impact on high streets more generally, please.
Well, its immediate impact on us has been, we organise Foodie Friday. And for those that don't know, Foodie Friday is a monthly street food event that takes place at Stockport Market and the surrounding area of the Old Town once a month on the last Friday of the month. And we bring about 15 to 20 street food traders together. We open the market in the evening. We have traders opening, selling a range of goods in there. And all the bars and the new bars around the marketplace all benefit from the additional footfall that we bring as part of the event every month. The estimated economic impact that Foodie Friday has when it's running a year, we estimate to be around about, it's hard to estimate these things, but around about, it could be as much as £500,000 a year in terms of additional income that it generates for the town centre. So the cancellation of an event like that obviously is going to have a huge economic impact on the town. Not only obviously for our street food traders who are now not able to trade at any outdoor events, but also for all those bars as well, and bars and restaurants in the town centre and the market traders. So we've been thinking, how can we respond in a way that supports our community of street food traders, but also does some good for the community as well. And so this idea of effectively providing free meals to the NHS was floated. One of our traders, a coffee trader actually, who trades at Marple Station, was approached by people who were wanting to pass on to pay forward coffee for NHS workers. And she approached us and said, oh, this idea sounds like you might be able to do something similar with the street food traders more broadly. So we approached the chief executive of Stockport NHS Foundation Trust, and she thought it was a great idea. And so we launched a campaign on Monday to raise £6,000 to provide a free meal to every single NHS worker at Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport. In 24 hours, we raised £3,000, over £3,000. So we are able to now provide 500 free meals to NHS staff at Stepping Hill, and the aim is to fund £6,000, which will provide a free meal to all the staff at the hospital.
Fantastic, and that's a really good practical solution. And what's your broader view in terms of coronavirus and the impact in the medium to short term?
Well, sort of talking about Matt's point there about the digital economy. I mean, I saw a thing again, we're seeing all these surveys come out, a survey of companies across many different countries, and around 40% of them said that they were accelerating the approach to automation. And so I don't think, as much as we're hoping that things return back to normal, I don't think we'll really have normality in the way that we perceived it again. I think there will be huge, significant shifts in the way companies operate. Many large employers won't want to have to face the fact of, being able to completely grind to a halt as a result of a health pandemic. And if they can automate or accelerate the process of automation more broadly, they'll look at the economic impact that will have moving forward, and we'll probably move towards that. What that means for our town centres and our high streets, we're seeing Amazon invest a lot of money in these Amazon Go stores in America. They're rolling out 3,000 across the US with plans to open even bigger stores. It's likely that we'll see Asda with the Walmart connections probably do something very similar. I mean, I've been sort of in and around the community of sort of high streets and town centres for the past 10 years now, and people have spoken a lot about this sort of slow creeping towards automation of, especially of our major retail stores. And we've seen that bit by bit kind of over the last 10 years. Wind back 10 years, you're probably getting 1 or 2 self-service checkouts in a supermarket. Now a lot of the time you'll see most of the checkouts are that way. And so we are moving to a sort of an ecosystem where the employees are, I think, considered to be less and less, relied upon if technology can replace them. And so we're seeing that also provides an opportunity for the experiential economy, as Matt and Kim both alluded to, because while if we're having these interactions where we are not coming face to face with human beings on our day-to-day interactions, the need to socialize is becoming a more and more of a demand for us. And so there's an opportunity there for, as Matt said, whether they be markets, food halls, places of gathering in town centres, to really focus on building those community hubs for people. And I think town centres should be looking towards that model moving forward.
Yeah, I think just to add to that point, I think about this, the local idea of what we have, valuing what we have locally, I think is going to be very important. I know Matt's got some good stats on home working, but I'm thinking the sort of heritage and the, people, we're very lucky here, we can actually go out into the country, whereas I know in Spain it's very difficult to actually get out into any green space. But I think people won't forget the space they've seen or the value of the local. So I think there's a strong link between, and that was happening before, retailers linking much more to heritage of a place and what's special about my place. And I hope, actually, personally, I hope whether we can reinforce that and that will move forward.
Okay, and just staying with this just for a couple of seconds, there's been lots of debate about, this is about behaviour and the virus before we move on from that, but about heroes and villains in terms of some of the large corporates, whether it's Sports Direct or My Problems with EasyJet or whatever they might be. What impact do you think that will have? Will it be temporary? Will people be fed up with Sports Direct? There's some heroes as well. Leon restaurants have been really positive. Any examples of that? And will it have any impact on those businesses, do you think?
I personally think so, yeah. I think people won't forget, particularly, I think consumers are interested in, not necessarily that the retailers might not be paying their rents or whatever, but they're interested in how they're dealing with people. And we think we're seeing that we are all people, and we are all, often a lot of us, employees in a retail organisation. So how retailers are handling the people in their business, I think, is smacking consumers a lot more in the face. And I think that won't go away very quickly. I think that will hang on in there, and how we're dealing with that. So I think retailers need to be very careful about that and the long-term impact that might have on their image.
Interesting. And
a quick counterpoint to that, Kim. To say that I think for those retailers that have market dominance, especially geographically, a lot of them, there's a question of whether or not consumers actually do have choice in this matter. For those brands like M&S who are offering to, I think we mentioned sort of the idea of paying 15% more to their staff, it's going to be something where if you're looking to, I suppose, comparison shop, you might go, actually, M&S did a good thing there, so I'm going to shop there. There are some places where literally, if say an Asda supermarket is the only Asda for miles around, that's the only choice that you might have. And the same goes for Amazon from a market dominance point of view. So as much as we'll see brands that are trying to, I suppose, increase that sense of corporate social responsibility, you've also got this fundamental issue, maybe more broadly with our economy, where actually these retailers have such a market dominance that it doesn't really matter in terms of how they practice if they've already got control of that market itself. So that's the other, I suppose, counterpoint to differentiate yourself.
Can I ask Joe, Joe, do you think there might be a generational difference on this? I mean, we know from kind of research and surveys, I mean, I think the Adelman Global Survey points out that, you know, Gen Zs in particular really value that kind of social purpose. You know, there's a sort of growing sense amongst the younger generation that business has to be a force for good and they will spend accordingly. But how many Gen Zs, for example, drink at Wetherspoons? I don't know. I mean, you know, will it affect their business?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and that comes back to it. I mean, how many people, and I don't know this, you know, will care about Tim Martin's practices? I don't know. How many people will go there because it's the cheapest option, and he has such market dominance in town centres that after this crisis, people will flock back there. I think you're right that there might be a sense of a generational shift. I think that younger people more broadly. We don't have as probably much as disposable income anyway. So when we're prioritising, you know, in terms of the experiential economy above and beyond just buying, I suppose, products. So yeah, there is definitely potentially a generational sort of shift between how certain generations view the acts of, you know, as we talked about before, Sports Direct and Mike Ashley or Tim Martin for that matter. And, but we'll see whether or not it has an impact on their business moving forward. You know, it was interesting. Mike actually did come out with a response very quickly after I think he saw a backlash on social media. I'd say driven maybe that would definitely be maybe by a younger demographic to his the way that he's behaving. So definitely the pressure can be put onto these people who aren't necessarily showing that they value their customer base or their worker. Sorry, the similar thing happened with Richard Branson and the you know, Virgin Atlantic. It was the same sort of situation, same backlash on social media.
Let me move on. Local authorities. You let me come to you, Matt. But you've all played a part in this. But what role for local authorities, local councils, can they affect the high street, or is it just a national issue?
No, I think local authorities have a critical role, but I think it's obviously important that government empower them more. And obviously we've seen the local government minister that's been moving quite swiftly in this crisis to relax planning rules, etc. I think there's calls on him at the moment to continue that, because councils can't really enact planning decisions at the moment because councillors can't meet. So there's a need to kind of go further in that. But ultimately, I want to see local authorities return to having a sort of role as custodians of place. And I think, you know, that placemaking role is going to be absolutely critical moving forward. I think, you know, what Kim said about there perhaps being a move towards more of an appreciation of local. Certainly, I've seen this in some areas with local authorities I work with. And these are areas where they're often kind of commuter belts, where people get up in the morning and travel to somewhere else to work and come home at night, and don't always spend a lot of time in their local town or village or high street. And I think there is now a growing appetite for them to want to do that. And there is a need for local authorities to start to kind of define much more of sort of unique identity for these places. You know, they can't be just these kind of beige, vanilla commuter towns. Local people really want to have more of a sense of belonging and identity. We saw the sort of social capital figures, the latest figures by the Office of National Statistics, showing there's been a fall in people's sense of belonging. And I feel there's a real appetite for people to improve that. Local authorities can do more to achieve that. So bigger emphasis on place, more kind of focus on building this identity. I think that's critical. And I personally think to do that, local authorities need to appreciate the efforts of people like Joe more. You know, I think it's often those kind of slightly kind of left field entrepreneurs who are doing these really important grassroots initiatives that breathe that kind of confidence and start to give place more of an identity. As someone who lives in the Stockport borough, I don't think Stockport was too impressive a few years ago, and it's starting to develop more of a character now, and with bands like the Blossoms, etc., coming through, it's getting more of a strong identity, and it's seen as less of a suburb of Manchester and more of a place in its own right. And there's a need to do more of that.
Okay. Just before I bring you in, Kim, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about the Grimsey Review. For those that don't know, Bill Grimsey, former Chief Executive of Iceland Foods and Chief Executive of a number of DIY chains, he set up a review to look at the high street and made a variety of recommendations recommendations which he took to government. You were part of that. What does that tell us about the role of local authorities and local governance?
Well, I don't know if Matt wants to, he was part of the review as well, if you want to take
Yes.
that one. But essentially, one of the main thrusts of the Grimsey review has always been about strong leadership. We went over to Rochelaire in Belgium, and they put together a very strong plan which had 5 different aspects to it about how the idea was it was going to become an open air food sort of centre in the Netherlands, and they worked towards all the actions they had. I think they had 50 actions under each of the headings to work towards that, and that was actually driven by the local mayor. But so it was about strong leadership, buying into this sort of central plan as far as and getting everybody to sort of take that on board and be part of it. This and stating what the identity is. And my understanding is that the town's funds applications are very much around that, being able to craft, towns having to craft their plans and have strong identities which incorporate their heritage and the community and the shops and the retail and everything. So that was a strong platform. And also Bill is very passionate and has been about the community hub solution, the idea that leisure sits with housing, sits with health. So bringing health into the high street has always been something that's featured quite heavily in the research that we did there. So my role essentially within the review was to gather examples of good practice of where people had implemented the actions recommended in the first review in the second, and really they reinforced a lot of the key messages that he put out in the first review. And these are essentially a lot of the government stuff that's coming out from government reinforces Bill's original ideas. I mean, Matt, I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. I just add that I think sort of key messages from the Grimsey Review for me was that retail is not going to be the most dominant force on high streets moving forward. It won't be the mainstay. And I think we're going to see a lot more retail lost. Obviously, in the last sort of days and weeks, we've seen people like Carluccio's, Chiquito, Laura Ashley, big national brands fall by the wayside. And sadly, I think there'll be more to come. The community hub thing, I think, is really important. We're going to have to see more high streets, sort of embrace more of a mix of kind of health, culture, leisure, education, all of that. I think the point Kim makes about health is interesting because coming out of coronavirus, I think the nation's health is going to be in a pretty poor state. There's already jokes about COVID-19 stone and fattening the curve. And I think any area that sort of makes us more active, and I love certain kind of yoga brands, national ones. I've got like this exercise outside and all that kind of stuff. More of that, please, because I think we're going to have there's going to need to be a national effort to get the nation back in shape as well.
Joe, what's your experience of dealing with Stockport Council, but also other councils where you've tried, you can be honest about this, other councils where you've tried to replicate it or seen others try to replicate what you've been doing?
Yeah, just echoing the point there, the role of local authorities is going to be absolutely huge after this crisis. I got involved with Stockport shortly after the financial crisis of 2008. The Portas review was launched shortly after that, almost as a response to struggling high streets, and so got involved at that point with a campaign to try and revitalise and regenerate in effect the Stockport's town centre in its old town, and we've been successful doing that over the past 10 years. Now, the one good thing about where we stand right now is the fact that we've got a running start on this. As you mentioned before, I'm part of the government's High Street Task Force. I'm a sort of delivery partner and board member of that, and we've got a group of people involved who are looking at the issues right now in terms of evaluating where town centres currently are, how they need to move forward. And a lot of that is about increasing the capacity for local authorities to make change. And, a big thing that I'm interested in, and it will be the hardest thing to evaluate, is the culture change that local authorities go through. And we are already seeing now quite interesting, exciting new partnerships emerge almost organically as a result of this crisis between community organisations. So, for example, our campaign, as a community organisation running a street food event with the NHS, our local NHS Foundation Trust is a good example. Those partnerships are key moving forward, especially with regards to town centres and high streets. And so we need to see more of that facilitation of good partnerships between the public, the private, and the third sector. And if we can, if this crisis, if there's any positive to this crisis, if we can facilitate more of those connections moving forward, our town centres will benefit as a result.
Yeah, let me, just before we're moving towards the end now, but and the final question is going to be asking you for your best 2 or 3 examples of good practice that you've seen on high streets, or it might be a quirkiness that's drawn people into a particular high street. But before I do that, any views on technology in high streets? So there's this whole concept around smart cities, around urban transport, electric vehicles, things like this. What's the impact of that sort of thing on high streets? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Matt, do you want to have a chat about that?
Well, I think it's important that technology, you talked about sort of smart cities there, and I think we need more kind of real-time data. So I'd like to see, better kind of measurement so people understand more around kind of public transport and, just have a better kind of knowledge of when the buses and the trains and everything are going, and sharing all that kind of stuff, and more to ease congestion as well, and help with parking, etc. Ultimately, I feel that towns are going to be sort of remodeled as we move, cities particularly in future. For the last 100 years, they've been designed around the car. And in many respects now, I feel like the car is just a kind of an accessory to the smartphone. And cities now moving forward and towns will be designed around the smartphone. That is how we navigate around cities. That's how we do commerce. That's how we connect with people. That's how we share experiences. So I think that is all still going to be the most important technology here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's interesting. Anything else? Or let me ask you, finally, your 2 or 3 smart solutions or good practice that you've seen on high streets. Kim, can you think of anything that's particularly caught your attention that you thought?
Maybe not necessarily the digital, but I think one of the things that's important for me is that we recognise that within a community or within a place, there's lots of people with lots of skills and expertise. So it's how businesses can engage those members of that community and make them feel part of it. So I think it's about actually getting people in to do that. So those businesses, I think, I've got a lot of respect for, those that can go from offering product to services. So the florist who originally sold the flowers is offering flower arranging classes. Now, that in itself, it seems simple, but it's a different business model. And I think it needs a bit of nurturing, because people think, well, how do I charge for that? Because it's not it's my skill, which is not a lot. People, they undervalue that. But I've seen a lot of that. And I was talking to some butchers actually, and they're thinking how, and this guy was saying he makes a lot out of offering master classes in butchery and things. So I think it's thinking about the value of not just the product, but the skills and expertise that businesses have and how you can draw on the local. So I would say that's a really good thing.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, besides your own good practice that you've already implemented, any other examples that have caught your attention over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm really interested in is the charrette process, which is effectively a planning process, a participatory planning process that involves as many members of the local community as possible in coming to I suppose, a final decision about whatever plan for your town centre should be. And I think that I've went and visited an architectural practice down in London, JTP, who are pioneers really of the process in the UK, and are working with a number of communities at the minute across the country to do that. And again, it comes back to this very simple idea of creating partnerships, as many partnerships and relationships and connections with as many members of your local community as possible. Again, another organisation doing great work on that front is Civic Voice. Ian at Civic Voice is doing a really good job of engaging and empowering local community stakeholders to influence policy making at basically the end of the day, influencing at the end of the day what kind of town you want to live in. And I don't think it should just be in the realm of private developers to decide what should a town centre look like because it makes them money. I think we need to sort of calibrate our town centres around mainly around, residents especially, thinking about how they can feed into the development of a town centre moving forward.
Good thing. And Matt, the last word goes to you. Any good practice examples that you want to share?
I've got a few, yeah. Firstly, I like Rosaleri because there's just really great visible leadership there. The mayor, Chris de Klerk, fantastic, really passionate about his high streets and local community. I mean, things like turning car parks into green spaces, converting, disused churches into markets, and using his powers to correct a sort of rental market by, finding landlords keeping properties vacant. He's seen rents come down a lot, which has enabled a lot more local independents to move in. Brilliant work. I'd also cite Bristol, previously under the independent mayor, George Ferguson. It had its car-free weekends. Amazing things happened there. You saw a theatre on the streets, sand castles, children playing, going down slides on streets, water slides. Fantastic stuff. Made a much more sort of carnivalesque, fun, great atmosphere in towns, which I think has to be kind of a really good signpost to the future. Two more quickly. York, I like the work of Johnny Hayes on Bishy Road, because he's forming kind of quite sort of loose informal associations, traders associations. And I think these kind of new groupings are really important. You can't rely always just on things like bids and local authorities or trade associations or things like the Chamber of Commerce. Sometimes these more smaller dynamic groupings can do really wonderful stuff, and Johnny's shown that. And finally, in Stockton, they're really focusing on the council there on the experience economy, and they're demolishing old 1960s shopping centres, which frankly are quite redundant and eyesores, and they're creating green spaces and then opening the town up to the river. So great work. So there's some really good stuff going on. And although these are difficult times, we should still celebrate the good work that continues to go on.
That's great. Let me say thank you very much for that. A thoroughly interesting conversation about high streets. Kim, Joe, Matt, thanks for joining the Downtown Den. Thank you.